Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming in this heat that I'm still getting used to. As Heidi said, I moved here just about 2 years ago. The reason was love. Ali, my husband, was based here with his lovely parents that have been a major improvement in my life and love life and everything, growth. We moved to a new house with some of our lovely neighbors who are here just 7-8 months before Harvey hit on this day last year. So today is actually the very anniversary of when things really hit home in Houston. I think the hurricane was in Texas already, but the Houston day is today. So I really thank Heidi for giving me this opportunity to show this show on a month that her gallery was going to be closed, along with all the galleries in the Colquitt Street. But she really saw something about the timing and the relevance of retelling the story and the story of how this whole exhibit came about on this very anniversary and the month surrounding it. It's been an amazing pleasure to work with Heidi and Elizabeth, the gallery manager. They're just amazing. I also like to do 2 shout-outs to Patricia Restrepo at the CAM Houston Contemporary Art Museum and Rabea Balling, another curator and educator in the city of Houston, who helped me a little bit modify the show and pick out the good, the better, the stronger pieces. And they graciously wrote very educated and articulate forewords for the catalog that we have, some of the excerpts of which are on that wall. So I'm very glad that you guys are here. I want to hear about the show and everybody else. So I'm going to make it short, just tell you about a little bit the process, show you some photos of the aftermath, which I have not shared. The photos on these 2 walls and that back wall are damaged photographs as the floodwaters interacted with the slides and the photos. The works on this wall, which I call the reinterpretation part of it, are collages that I made. It's all handmade and unique with photos that I took from the reconstruction or pieces and bits of the damaged photos. The story I like to start with is very kind of my saddest part when we had to cut 2 magnolia trees, which were part of the reason we bought this house. We really loved where they were, how beautiful and tall they were. And a couple months after the floods, we ended up, I need to speak slower because my baby is like, it's like jogging. The trees, they had to be cut down. Specialists came, I kept saying, no, you can keep them. And the answer was no, it's dangerous, it can fall on the house or something, or on a person. So one day, 2 guys came and they cut it, and I shadowed them very closely, kind of dangerously. They were barehanded, they had nothing on, they just did electric saw and a ladder, no harness, nothing. And it was just all over the bushes and all the messy leaves, trying to photograph this event of losing these beautiful magnolia trees that I didn't know how old they were. So that's just a little video of that day. That's before, when it actually was blooming.
Is there down below?
I counted these rims. They were about 30, so I called this whole video and just the interaction with this story of the steel magnolia, what I called a requiem for the steel magnolia, rest in peace, 1987 to 2017. It was dramatic, and I really thought I had to do something about it. The environmental damage, which was very obvious with the floods around the city. It's still ongoing, all the Superfund toxics coming out and all the sewages, and just the amount of trees that they had to go and everything was overwhelming, and everybody much more experienced and expert than me is studying them and doing things about them. But personally, this was a hard thing. I cut pieces of these trunks. I had the guys, which they probably thought I was crazy. Why does she want a dead trunk? Like, I want to make something out of them, like placemats or a sculpture of some sort. I counted the rims. Like I said, there were 30. With time, as a lot of us have experienced, the drama and the trauma of this loss and sadness was much less than I thought it would be. A lot of it had to do with the fact that you remember that life is just a process, and the thing, change is constant, and everything is moving in waves in a way. So I have to say that it was a little bit less dramatic, and we kind of now look at the empty space and say, oh, well, we actually have more lights coming through. Taking that to what happened with the photographs. This is what, just to give you guys, this is our neighborhood, Indian Circle. That's, I don't remember what day, but this is how much water was at some point. That's our neighbors' cars, I think, just across the street. This is our house. The door that you see, that half door, goes into a hallway kind of opening towards the studio. That's the studio door. This is after 6 feet of water had already come down. The studio is that door on the left, the wooden door. For a week and a half, we couldn't even take this picture because water was all the way up. But then when it started receding, we could take this picture and then wait another couple of days for it to go more down until we had to have a demo crew come and break it up. This is the pre. And this is the day they came in to open that door. This one I kept in this slideshow because the wall, as you see, that's the light fixture hanging off the ceiling, the installation, everything, sheetrock, paint. On the left wall, those 3 images were just taped beforehand by me on the actual wall. It was really surprising to see them stay there. Yes, so in the middle of all these, again, I'm all over this demolition crew who are really expert at what they're doing, and I'm going, trying to take a picture, and they're like, get out of my way. So I took a picture of that, which I printed on that wall, and I'm very happy that it's been collected twice. There are 3 editions of these images. I love that particularly because one of them is a photo of a skyline in Tehran, Iran, and it just has the blue sky and everything is very nice. And the other one is a Persian poem in a calligraphic way. There's a brush stuck there that obviously I didn't stick it there, but with the waters going all the way up to the ceiling and even seeming through the ceiling through our first floor, some items got stuck up. One of them was this brush. It just went up, and as the water came down, it just ended up on that location. There were other things, boxes, not chairs, but other things on the very top of the ceiling. So those were all very hard to see. There were a lot of things in this studio, a lot of the slides. So as these guys started moving garbage out, mounds and mounds, I read somewhere that 8 million cubic yard of garbage was taken out of Houston only. So it takes maybe a day or 2 to just grab everything out. A lot of it was my stuff, obviously, cameras, photos, slides, albums, art material. They would ask me, what about this? What about that? And I had the very short span of time to make decisions. Keep it, I'll make a choice. This is where I started to kind of documenting it. So documentation became an immediate process of dealing with this. Let me just document this before either I decide for you guys to take it. Part of me was thinking, what if they're taking something out of here without asking me? But I'm positive they didn't. I really appreciate their patience and their understanding because I ended up in a mourning kind of zone and it was overwhelming. They kept coming out, and I leafed through these photographs and paperwork and artworks. The ones on the back is, for example, stuff I did for another project. The urgency was pretty overwhelming, but the photographing and the documentation was a good tool. Suzanne Sontag wrote a lot on photography in the 70s, says, you can't possess a reality, but you can possess a photograph. So photographs are objects, they're commodities. And then she says you can't possess the past, the present, but you can possess the past. So I was really doing that. As these guys were becoming, they were in the present, I was just like clicking before they became the past, because I couldn't keep the present. So that was pretty much the initial days and days of just take photos before even drawing came into picture. They're very much connected to each other. They're with the toxins and the waters and the mud and the photochemicals and sewage, I'm sure. These are the metal prints that I've printed on these walls on purpose. They're the only ones that I kept in a way, and with Windex, we were able to clean a lot of it. It's not as smelly as everything else. The mud and the debris comes off of it. So that's one of the reasons with Heidi, actually, we thought that this would be a good medium to print on, because it's, what do you call it, flood-proof? She calls it, they're flood-proof, they're hurricane-proof. They've tested their, the next one was laying down what could be taken off and leafed off of these mounds of the earlier images you saw. Like I said, a lot of them you just don't want to touch it. It smells like sewage. Some of them were neater, depending on what kind of box you had, how the water went in them. So there were days, if not weeks, of laying them down here and there to dry them. It's a long process. And I think I got sick because I was just too much looking at them. It was maybe a little bit, I don't know, the emotional part, but I think I smelled a lot of bad things I probably shouldn't have. I dried them for a long time, and then I boxed them. So they ended up in some boxes in the garage. And again, there's this urgency, because the house is completely stripped down, 4 feet down. It's like taking the skirt off of your whole house in every inch of it. It was very new for me. I've never been in the construction zone. My husband, on the other hand, had been, not a hurricane relief, but as an architect and a real estate person. So for me, it was all like, oh, they're even cutting like this corner. It's like, yeah, everything has to come down. So because of that, you don't have a corner to put things. So then I move things upstairs. I'm like, I don't want to take these to the living areas, because it's, it's mold and dangerous and all of that. But anyway, I tried to find places. But there was this hoarding a little bit, not letting go and keeping things very much involved. There were a lot of moments that you would think, just get rid of them. This is never going to work. But I didn't. I kept them. So I'm happy I did. And one of the things that I really like, it's this concept, it's a Japanese concept called kintsugi. And that's where they take their broken pottery and they use gold leaf or silver or lacquer or some good material other than super glue. And they remake the bowl and keep it. And it comes apparently from the Buddhist philosophy of things are not permanent, everything is in process, the non-attachment concept again. That was helpful, to always put yourself from this mode of holding and hoarding and accumulating and keeping and all that, to the let go and detach process. I can say that there were a lot of that thinking involved. The house was under construction for months to come. This was the view of, the living room, and light comes and goes, and photography is light. It's really capturing light and doing something with that and exposing it. So you would see really nice moments of abstract imagery. It was kind of nice to see this furniture looking like something like a sculpture or something that somebody would have done on purpose. I took a lot of pictures of our construction time, covered furniture, surreal scenes like a wheelbarrow packed with things in your main hallway, where you can't even go every day because there's nails coming out and people with axes breaking through. But there are moments that you take yourself away from that and just say, oh, this is actually kind of cool. The collages are using a lot of those images of the construction time. The other thing that happened with seeing these damaged photographs and the effects of them is how it would remind me of works of other artists that I know. Gerhard Richter, that a lot of you know, uses his body very intense, and just rolls this swab of paint over and over until he creates something that looks like this. This looks like a lot of my pictures, I think, here. So without having done much to the flooded images, the ones on these two walls, I would be thinking, oh, that looks like a Richter, or it would look like somebody else. Curtis Mann, he's a Chicago-based contemporary artist. He takes found photographs off of the internet and manually bleaches information and images off of his photo. The other things come out with his bleaching process and manipulating an actual photo he's printed. And I had them given to me by Hurricane Harvey, and I picked them, and I, didn't do much to them. And I'm like, well, I didn't even have to go through this very conceptual process of ripping information and creating mystery out of the image for the viewers. This is somebody else that Patricia actually introduced me to, Jessica Warboys. She puts paint and pigments and everything in large pieces of canvas, and she dips the canvas into the water, in ocean water. And then she pulls it out and just lives with the outcome of it. So the water doing something to your painting. She ends up with things like that. They're large scale. They're hung in galleries and museums like this. So again, artists have visually and practice-wise done a lot of things to whatever medium, canvas, photo, paintings, to come up with these more mysterious and question-making final images. And so that was fun. It was really fun, and it was really like creative and thinking about, wow, now I have something to work with. This guy I looked up as I was looking for people who do that. He's out of LA. He takes photographs of lakes and rivers. Matthew Brandt from Los Angeles. He takes a bucket of water from the same lake or river, goes back to the darkroom, and dips and reprocesses the photograph of the lake with lake water, and comes up with things like that. They're widely exhibited. Prices go from $3,000 to $40,000. And I didn't know about him. I knew about the earlier artists. But now that I look at it, then there's this idea of the collective art making as well, because it's all about seeing and looking and just questioning, and the give or take between you and the image and the work in front of you. The land artists or environmental artists like Andy Goldsworthy in this picture too deal with the ephemerality of just life and work. Nothing is permanent. He makes a sculpture out of an ice and without using any binding material. He goes at 5 a.m., his hands are all covered in blood because he's working barehanded, and he has to finish the work and photograph it before the sun rises and the water comes down. So this idea of non-attaching, again, back to that concept, but in relation to the arts, of being not attached to a work of art or a photograph or something like that. Why? These are just things. These guys, the land artists, really inspire me because they have that aspect. It's just the making of it. It's the creative process. It's that satisfaction you get from that and the message you send. Although he does photograph his work. So that's back again to the role of photography as documentation and all that. My slides were very much damaged. There's some of them over there. I think some of them fell. They're very toxic right now because they're still processing with mold. And some of them are printed. I was able to dry some of them and print them somehow. They're all in boxes on that table in the back, and then some in the bathroom. They're really just test drives to see what we can do with it. That's probably a project I will work more with. But again, as a comparative thing to past artists, Stan Brakhage was an experimental filmmaker in the 70s and 60s and 70s who would take film, rolls of film like this, and paint on it. Like that was his medium. Take film with information on it and just put paint on it, dry it, and come up with this kind of very, I think, watery, it seems very much like you will it's shocking how similar it is to what happened to my flooded slides. These are all his. And experimentation has always been part of my practice. I've started with developing my own photographs in a homemade darkroom. These are mine, for example. You can't even see the transition from his to mine. That's my mother, pregnant with me. I'm glad it stayed, because most of the slides were really badly gone. So experimentation was always part of it, doing something that you can't tell how it's done or what's the initial starting point, how you ended up there. I mean, I love this. It's like however you want to see it, but I don't know what it was. I have no idea. Was it a bunch of us in a family photo? Was it a bunch of, there's no way to say. So I think there's a lot to work with these slides. That is a family photo. You can tell the people. That's my great-grandparents, 4th generation, great-grandparents, mother on the left, grandma on the right, me and my sister. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 generations there. Other than, I have numbers. Other than all this practice stuff, and I let you guys ask your questions, I'm going to end it soon. One thing that I have to give another shout out and mention is social media. So at the beginning of that frantic drawing process of the driveway and then the balcony and boxing and unboxing and putting it aside and coming back to it, I was posting things on Instagram, and the reactions were very encouraging. The collective healing aspect of it, people have been through these. It was my first one, a natural disaster, but not a lot of people's. People made comparisons to other ways they had lost memorabilia and treasured items, like divorces. So it was very, very humbling to hear about other people's stories. So that was pretty much the initiation point of, there is things to be worked at this. And the idea of making something that's visually interesting and mysterious, but comes from something bad and damaging and garbage making, has the message of there's always something in a bad thing. Just try to find that and make that your lifeline and stick to it, and maybe you come out of it better than you thought when you were going into it. Thank you. Thank you. Q&A.